Hi, Mr. Loomis. Welcome back for the second lesson of our unit about the social revolution that America underwent in the decades after World War II. Today we're going to be exploring the counterculture, which is quite famous in American history. You may already be familiar with the art, music, and fashion of this moment in time, so hopefully today will be interesting to you as you learn about where these ideas came from. We'll get started with a preview of our topics. We'll begin by connecting the counterculture of the 60s to the beat generation of the 1950s. Then we'll talk about the heart of the counterculture, which was San Francisco. Remember, if you're going to San Francisco, you're going to need some flowers in your hair. We'll talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, as well as an interesting group of hippies called the Merry Pranksters. We'll mention communes, which were supposed to be perfect communities. And we'll finish with the story of two famous concerts, Woodstock and Altamont, as well as explore the lasting impact of the counterculture. Let's get started where it all began, with those cool beatniks. The counterculture was similar to the beatniks of the 1950s, who also believed that mainstream society was broken and tried to find new ways of living. However, the counterculture was different because they were more welcoming, while the beatniks were a hard group to join. The teenagers of the counterculture also believed in social change. They joined movements like the African American and Mexican American civil rights movements, environmental movements, and women's rights movements. They also famously protested against the war in Vietnam. The counterculture movement of the 1960s needed a place or a leader around which people and their ideas could gather. Haight-Ashbury, a neighborhood in San Francisco, California, became the center of the counterculture movement. The neighborhood was not chosen to be the home of thousands of hippies, but it happened because San Francisco was already home to many beatniks, and Haight-Ashbury had inexpensive rents. What made it a magnet for hippies was the availability of drugs. In 1966, the Psychedelic Shop, owned by Ron and Jay Thielen, opened on Haight Street. It became one of the unofficial community centers for the growing number of young people moving to the neighborhood. Other shops opened nearby, selling drugs openly, as well as crystals, tie-dyed shirts, books, and other symbols of the counterculture. The Diggers, a local group known for their street theater, also played an important role in the neighborhood. They believed in a free society and the good in human nature. To act on their ideas, they set up a free store, gave out free meals, and built a free medical clinic, which relied on volunteers and donations. The Haight-Ashbury neighborhood's fame reached its peak when it became the home of famous musicians such as Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, and Janis Joplin. They not only immortalized the hippie scene in song, but also knew many in the community. National media coverage of hippie life in Haight-Ashbury drew the attention of young people from all over America. In the summer of 1967, called the Summer of Love, the neighborhood was overrun, attracting teenagers, college students, middle-class vacationers, and even partying soldiers. There were not enough places to stay in Haight-Ashbury, and the neighborhood scene quickly deteriorated. Overcrowding, homelessness, hunger, drug problems, and crime shot up. Shop owners capitalized on the crowds and sold clothing at enormous profits. The original residents and hippies who had helped create the movement thought the store owners were giving up on the core ideas of the counterculture just to make money. By August, most people left to go back to school, and the Summer of Love had changed the neighborhood forever. What had once been the home for those who wanted to separate themselves from mainstream America had been overrun by the pressures and problems they had hoped to avoid. The neighborhood remained important in American memory, but it had changed. Never again would there be a place quite like it. One of the things that people remember most about the counterculture is the phrase sex, drugs, and rock and roll. To really understand what the counterculture was all about, it's important to look at and know these three things. The young people of the counterculture believed in free love. This meant that they didn't want to follow the usual rules about love and sex that their parents had tried to teach them. For example, they didn't think that you had to be married to have sex. They thought that love should be free and not controlled by anyone else. Because of this, more people started having sex before getting married. Birth control became legal in 1965, which made it easier for people to have sex without worrying about getting pregnant. Colleges started letting male and female students live in the same dorms. People who believed in free love thought that love was the opposite of hate. They wanted to promote peace and love instead of war. They often got together in parks and on college campuses to protest against the Vietnam War, listen to music, and share drugs. These events were called love-ins. During the 1960s, many members of the counterculture experimented with drugs such as marijuana, LSD, mushrooms, and pills. However, they didn't take just any drug. They avoided alcohol and sedatives, which they believed would dull their minds. Instead, they tried hallucinogenic drugs that they thought would connect with their spiritual side. A Harvard professor named Timothy Leary became famous by openly promoting the use of LSD. For many who followed the counterculture, smoking marijuana, which they called dope, and using drugs like LSD or acid were part of their identity. But there were consequences to this drug use. With free love came a rise in sexually transmitted diseases. With LSD and acid came overdoses, addiction, and bad trips where drug-induced hallucinations turned into nightmares. Unfortunately, some of the most talented musicians of the counterculture were lost to drugs, including Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Jimi Hendrix. The hippie movement was all about breaking the rules of what was fashionable at the time. Instead of suits and dresses, men and women wore jeans and grew their hair out long. They chose to wear sandals, moccasins, or no shoes at all. Men often had beards, while women wore little or no makeup. Hippies liked to wear brightly colored clothing in unusual styles like bell-bottom pants, vests, tie-dyed shirts, and long skirts. They were also into clothing inspired by Native American, Asian, African, and Latin American cultures. Many hippies sewed or made their own clothes to protest big business, and they shopped at flea markets and secondhand stores. Both men and women liked to wear Native American jewelry, headscarves, headbands, and long beaded necklaces. They decorated their homes, cars, and other belongings with psychedelic art. The hippies left a huge impact on fashion, and their iconic looks have been brought back many times on fashion runways all around the world. Let's shift and talk about the very specific group of hippies, because the story of the Merry Pranksters can help us understand what the counterculture meant to so many young people during the 1960s. It began with two writers. Ken Kesey was an author who helped connect the Beat generation of the 50s to the counterculture movement of the 60s. Together with his friend Neal Cassady, who was the inspiration for the main character of Jack Kerouac's book On the Road, they decided to travel across the country and record their trip. In 1964, Cassady needed to go to New York after publishing his own book. So Kesey and Cassady, along with a group of friends who called themselves the Merry Pranksters, came up with this crazy idea. They wanted to travel to New York in an old school bus, just like the pioneers did of the olden days, but going from west to east instead of east to west. They called the bus Further and decorated it with bright psychedelic art, both inside and out. The Merry Pranksters invited some famous people to join them, including musicians from the Grateful Dead. They also invited writer Stuart Brand, who later wrote a book called The Whole Earth Catalog, which was a guide for people who wanted to live like hippies. Kesey and the Merry Pranksters wanted to make art out of their everyday experiences and see America from a different perspective. They decided to take LSD, a powerful drug that can change the way people see and feel things. During the trip, they filmed a lot of the journey using 16mm cameras. This footage was mostly unseen until it was used in a documentary film called Magic Trip, which came out in 2011. After the bus trip, the Merry Pranksters threw parties called acid tests around the San Francisco Bay Area. While in New York, Cassady introduced Kesey to Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, the famous beatnik writer, who then introduced them to Timothy Leary, the Harvard professor who was a supporter of psychedelic drugs. The cross-country trip of Further and the activities of the Merry Pranksters inspired other people to create psychedelic buses of their own. You might have seen a psychedelic bus in the Beatles' 1967 movie The Magical Mystery Tour, or in the Partridge Family TV show of the 1970s. And the Magic School Bus books and TV show for children also features a psychedelic bus. Some hippies in the 1960s and 1970s wanted to move far away from mainstream society. They felt that America's cultural and spiritual freedoms were limited by city and suburban life, so they decided to leave it behind. These hippies went to communes, usually set up on farms or campsites in the countryside. There they tried to live closer to nature, respect the earth, and escape from modern life with its obsessions with material things and money. Some communes grew their own organic food, while others shared everything they owned. The people living in the communes had tried out new ideas about love and marriage, and some practiced free love openly. The most famous commune was The Farm in Tennessee, which was created in 1971. The people living on the farm combined Christian and Asian religion. They lived together, owned no private property except tools and clothing, and promoted nonviolence. They tried to live as one with nature, becoming vegetarians and avoiding the use of animal products. Like other hippies, they also smoked marijuana to achieve a feeling of oneness and harmony. Unfortunately, most communes did not last. Popular leaders left or money ran out, causing the commune to fall apart. Disagreements, rivalries, and jealousies also destroyed some communes. It's important to remember that even though hippies were trying to find a different way of life, they were still human, with flaws and problems. One of the aspects of the counterculture you may already know about is the music. Music was a big deal for young people during the counterculture. In San Francisco, a new kind of music called psychedelic rock. It was all the rage. Bands like the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and The Doors created new sounds with electric guitars, lyrics that questioned authority, and songs about drug use. When the Beatles made a psychedelic album called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the music of the counterculture became popular with everyone. Folk rock was also popular. Folk rock artists wanted to get back to America's musical roots instead of making music for money. They played old songs with old instruments like acoustic guitars, harmonicas, and simple vocals. The most famous singer of the time, Bob Dylan, sang "The Times They Are A-Changing," which became an anthem of the generation. Other folk singers like Janis Joplin, the Mamas and the Papas, Simon and Garfunkel, Sonny and Cher, and Peter, Paul and Mary continued the folk rock tradition. Music was a way for the new generation to come together and celebrate being rebellious and different. In August 1969, a famous concert happened near the town of Woodstock, New York. It was a cultural moment that symbolized the independence and freedom of a whole generation of Americans who were part of the counterculture movement. The Woodstock Music Art Fair, usually just called Woodstock, was a huge music festival that took place in August 1969 on a dairy farm in the southern New York's Catskill Mountains. It is considered an important moment in popular music history and a defining moment for the counterculture generation. The festival had many difficulties. Thousands of people came, leading to traffic jams. The festival site could not handle the number of people, and there was not enough food, too few bathrooms, and almost no first aid. The weather was bad, and the site was full of mud before the festival ended. Despite these difficulties, most of the people who were at Woodstock had a good time. There was a feeling of social harmony that, combined with the quality of the music and the sheer number of people, made it one of the most important events of the century. Jimi Hendrix, the great African-American guitar player, was the last performer at Woodstock. Hendrix played for 2 hours, including a psychedelic version of the Star-Spangled Banner that was captured on film. This performance was a unique moment in time for the entire generation. Hendrix's rendition of the song was both the national anthem and also very different, reflecting the view of young Americans who loved their country but wanted to change it from what they knew in their childhood. After the concert, Max Yasker, who owned the farm where the festival took place, saw it as a triumph of peace and love. He talked about how nearly 500,000 people spent 3 days with music and peace on their minds, despite the possibility of disaster, riots, crime, and catastrophe. He believed that if people came together, they could overcome the problems of America and hope for a brighter and more peaceful future. Ultimate Speedway Free Festival was supposed to be a celebration of music on the West Coast, just like Woodstock had been on the eastern side of the country. But it turned out to be a very different event. A few months after Woodstock, on December 6, 1969, about 300,000 people gathered at Altamont, California for the concert. Many famous musicians like the Rolling Stones, Jefferson Airplane, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young came to perform. However, unlike Woodstock, at Altamont, things quickly went wrong. One of the biggest mistakes was hiring a motorcycle gang called the Hells Angels to be security. They were supposed to keep people off the stage, but the organizers had agreed to give them beer instead of paying them, and as they drank more and more, they started to fight. Tragically, one person, Meredith Hunter, was killed when the Hells Angels tried to get him off the stage. There were also 3 accidental deaths, including 2 people who died in a hit-and-run car accident, and 1 who drowned in an irrigation canal after taking LSD. Many people were hurt as well. There was a lot of property damage. People often compare Altamont to Woodstock. While Woodstock was peaceful and showed how people could live peacefully together, Altamont showed the opposite. The Altamont concert marked the end of the hippie era and the youth culture of the 1960s. After Altamont, many Americans decided that young people could not live or could not create a loving community if there were no rules. Let's sum things up by looking at the legacy of the counterculture. In all, only about 10% of the young people in America had been hippies. Most people wanted to have jobs and lives like their parents. But the counterculture was so different that the media made them seem more popular than they really were, and it had a lasting impact on the country. For starters, the hippies and the counterculture changed the way America ate. They started stores that sold healthy foods like yogurt, wheat germ, and granola, which had not been common in the 1950s. They also made being vegetarian more popular. The counterculture made it more acceptable to use drugs, and they changed what people thought about relationships and sex. They created new kinds of music and influenced the social movements of the time, including the African American, Mexican American, environmental, and women's rights movements. They even changed America's foreign policy by protesting the war in Vietnam. Fashion also changed because of the counterculture. However, the idea that the hippies could make the world perfect by starting communes or using drugs to find a deeper meaning of life did not work out. While drugs could make people see amazing things in the short term, they ruined lives over time. Like earlier dreams of building perfect societies, the hippies' dreams of creating a perfect society did not succeed. Most of the members of the counterculture grew up, got jobs, had families, and left their hippie past behind. Others kept searching for what they wanted and moved to far-off corners of America. Now that they're retired, these aging hippies raise interesting questions about whether or not it's wise to try to stay young forever. Before we go, let's take a look back at our big ideas from today's lesson. In the 1960s, teenage baby boomers rejected the social rules of their parents and tried to find a new way of living and understanding the world. This counterculture was centered in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood of San Francisco and grew out of the older beatnik ideas of the 1950s. Some hippies rejected modern life altogether and tried to create perfect societies and communes where they shared property and sometimes sexual partners. Music was important because it was a way for young people to share ideas and have a sense of identity. They also experimented with new forms of art, fashion, and drugs. Although some of the ideas of the counterculture, such as free love or communes, failed, the young people of the 1960s had a lasting impact on America. For some, the climax of the counterculture was the Woodstock Music Festival in 1969. The Altamont Music Festival in 1969 was the opposite of Woodstock and showed all the dark sides of the counterculture. Thank you very much. In our next lesson, we'll learn about how leaders in government, especially President Lyndon Johnson, tried to join in with America's desire for trying new things and fixing society's problems during the 1960s. It'll be time for Sesame Street, school lunches, and seatbelts. I'll see you then.
Come on.